Superhero films. For many decades, they've been regarded with praise, hatred, and everything in between. Across their history, there's been debate of what started the superhero craze in Hollywood. Some say The Dark Knight, others say Iron Man. Many would say it was Spider-Man. But I think the one that really got the ball rolling for all of those to come was X-Men. Yes, X-Men was a real trailblazer for superhero movies, and especially for Marvel, that would pave the way to where we are today. Without it, we wouldn't get Spider-Man, which would lead to Iron Man, which would lead to the Avengers. And oh boy, was it quite an interesting journey for X-Men fans at the movies in those 20 years. Of all the big superhero movie universes, I think the X-Men franchise is the most interesting to analyze on a variety of levels. From the progression of modern superhero movies, and especially the massive spectrum of quality across these movies. Compared to the consistently great quality of the MCU, and the garbage heap with the occasional diamond in the rough of the DCEU, the X-Men series has seen it all, with some high highs, some low lows, and some middling mids. So in honor of the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, I wanted to do a marathon of all these movies to get the full picture, and because I haven't seen the majority of these in many years, so I wanted to see how I feel about them now with a fresh perspective. And as a bonus, I'm going to be looking at all the other Marvel films that Fox did, like Daredevil and Fantastic Four. So without further ado, ready those claws, put on your black leather jumpsuits, because what would you prefer, yellow spandex? And let's dive into the chaotic world of Fox's Marvel Universe. Our journey begins all the way back in 2000, the beginning of the new millennium, with X-Men. The original X-Men was one of the first big boy superhero movies of either Marvel or DC that I ever watched. I haven't seen this one since I was 11 years old. And looking at it now, there's still a lot to appreciate, as this and Spider-Man laid the foundation for superhero movies in the 21st century. If there's one thing that remains pretty consistent across the franchise, it's the casting. These are still some of the most iconic casting choices in the superhero genre to this day, especially Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, and Ian McKellen as Wolverine, Professor X, and Magneto. I also really enjoyed James Marsden, Halle Berry, and Anna Paquin as Cyclops, Storm, and Rogue, respectively. Cyclops has some funny banter with Wolverine in their rivalry, and while Rogue in these movies isn't the same character that she is like in the comics or the animated series, she's still an interesting character in her own right. It's very much a product of its time, with some of the early 2000s superhero movie cheese like some of the effects and dialogue. I already mentioned Wolverine and Cyclops' rivalry, but then there's one of the most infamous superhero lines, courtesy of Storm.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
That is one of the cheesiest lines, but that's why I love it so much. You're expecting something really big with all that buildup, only for it to end with that. Also, what would you prefer? Yellow spandex? Always makes me laugh because yes, I do prefer the yellow spandex. And yeah, you can definitely tell that this was in the post-Batman and Robin period of comic book movies because of the fact that executives at the time thought that fans were too scared of color. That means comic book movies were not allowed to have color. While a bit slow in parts and definitely is a product of its time, I cannot deny how important X-Men is to the superhero genre as we know it today, and is a decent start to a very fascinating franchise to say the least. This movie is fucking hilarious. Daredevil is like if an early 2000s angsty teenager were a movie. It tries to come off as edgy and cool, but it makes so many choices that are so stupid and hysterical that it is hilarious. Admittedly, there are some boring stretches and the story feels like it lacks a second act as it slowly introduces its characters and then goes straight into the final act. But when a bunch of action and stuff happens, that's when the movie becomes a riot. It's just goofy. That's the best way I can describe it. It's just a goofy movie. Which was exactly what I was hoping for, knowing that this was by the same director as Ghost Rider. At one point in the movie, Foggy tricks Matt into squeezing mustard into a coffee cup. He doesn't drink it, but you cannot beat Nicolas Cage with a martini glass of jelly beans. Also, why does every establishing shot have to be a sped up fly around of the city that makes it look like it was a shot from an action movie trailer at the time? I was surprised to see some of the people that were in this movie. I forgot that before he was Happy Hogan, Jon Favreau was Foggy Nelson. And every single time that Colin Farrell is on screen as Bullseye is hysterical. It is comedy gold. The action scenes are silly. The playground fight with Matt and Elektra was just as funny as I had heard it was. But if there's anything about this movie that perfectly embodies the 2000s, it's the soundtrack. It's probably the funniest superhero movie soundtrack of all time. And it does have some competition. I mean, anyone remember the Batman Begins commercial set to Nickelback? I kid you not, this is how this movie introduces Kingpin. I'm an outlaw. Quick on the draw. Now imagine if this was how they introduced him in the Daredevil show or Spider-Verse. I'm an outlaw. Quick on the draw. But the funniest part of the entire film has to be this montage of Daredevil gearing up and Elektra training by slicing sandbags. Can you guess what song plays? I'm not kidding around. I did not edit this. This is not even the only time that Evanescence is played in the movie. I've seen too many memes using this song that it's hard for me to not laugh when this song plays. It is a great, so bad it's good superhero movie. In the words of Cosmonaut Marcus, it is delicious garbage. I can think of plenty of superhero movie sequels that exceed their predecessor, and X-Men 2 is one of them. X2 takes what worked from the first and expands and improves upon it. The story and action sequences are bigger and better. The opening action sequence with Nightcrawler's attempted attack on the president is still one of the best opening action scenes in a superhero film, starting the film off with a bang. The raid on the mansion is intense, the infiltration of Stryker's base is a highlight. It makes great use of its ensemble cast by fleshing out its returning characters and introducing some great new ones. I really love Alan Cumming in this as Nightcrawler. I wish we got to see more of him, and he wasn't just in this movie. In terms of the returning characters, we get glimpses into Wolverine's backstory with his connection to Stryker. I also really like Shawn Ashmore's expanded role in this as Iceman and his romance with Rogue. It's always fun to see someone who's normally a villain fight alongside the heroes against a bigger common enemy, and Magneto in this is no exception. Overall, a really solid sequel that improves upon the original and does exactly what a sequel should do, and personally, it's my favorite of the original trilogy.
This is... What? This is boring.
If Daredevil was my favorite kind of bad movie, then Elektra is my least favorite kind of bad movie. Anything sort of funny happens occasionally compared to how frequently funny Daredevil was. It doesn't have an unhinged soundtrack like playing Evanescence during a funeral scene and a suiting up montage. In one shot, a Pepsi can is visible, and that was enough to make me laugh because it's impossible for me to look at Pepsi now without thinking of Madam Web. I guess her web really does connect them all. Part of the final fight was sort of funny with all the sheets flying everywhere. The guy with the living animal tattoos was kinda cool, I guess. Story is boring, the pacing is atrocious, and it just felt way longer than it actually was. It's only 97 minutes, but it felt like it was 3 hours. It's uninteresting, uninspired, and feels straight up passionless. I'm really struggling to say anything more about this or just get really angry over it because of just how nothing it is, and I'm gonna forget about it really quickly. I'll always have a soft spot for Fantastic Four. I can't hate it. It's kind of the nostalgia talking, but I still think it is right now still the best real Fantastic Four movie. Even though I'm also in the camp of the best Fantastic Four movie is The Incredibles. It isn't the most groundbreaking superhero movie in the world, but I still find it to be fun popcorn entertainment. And a lot of that is because I love the cast. I'll always think of this cast when the Fantastic Four come up in conversation. Ioan Gruffudd is a fun and charismatic and nerdy Reed Richards. Jessica Alba is good as Sue Storm, though while I agree she is pretty attractive, I think the movie's a little too obsessed with getting her to strip naked, but in a way that still keeps the movie PG-13. Michael Chiklis is excellent as Ben Grimm, as he does kind of ground the film a bit more with his dilemma with how the cosmic rays affected him more than everyone else. For 2005, the Think prosthetics and makeup were extremely impressive then, and almost 20 years later, they still are. Both for how much it looks like the character come to life, and that Chiklis was still able to pull off a strong performance buried under all of those prosthetics. But the highlight of these movies for me will always be Chris Evans as Johnny Storm. Before we all loved him as Captain America, he played a character who is the exact opposite of Cap. I'm so used to picturing Captain America first when he pops up, when in this, he's actually kind of an ass, but the fun kind of ass. Though he's not America's ass, if you know what I'm saying. The banter between the Thing and Human Torch is pretty much spot on, and supplies some of the biggest laughs in the movie in the contrast between Ben and Johnny's personalities and how they react to their powers. Where one of them loses the woman he loved because of his new appearance, the other loves being a show-off with his new powers and being the most performative about the team as a whole. Dr. Doom functions fine as a villain, but he isn't anything too remarkable. I also completely forgot that Maria Menounos was in this movie as the nurse that Johnny flirts with, because I'm so used to seeing her in movie theater pre-shows. I just enjoy the vibe of this movie, that it has that 2000s feel, but in a good way. It's a good kind of 2000s cheese. The action scenes are enjoyable, like the entire sequence on the bridge. I also gotta mention that the product placement in this movie is hilarious, particularly in the big argument outside of the X Games. I laughed so hard at the Family Guy billboard that shows up at multiple shots. Just the fact that a Family Guy billboard is there is just funny to me. Before Madam Web came out, I'm pretty sure this movie held the record for the most Pepsi product placement in a Marvel movie. There's a Pepsi ad on the taxi, every shot of the X Games scene has a Pepsi logo somewhere. Pepsi has taken over the world, and I think Madam Web has blessed and cursed, more so blessed, my brain into laughing every time I see anything Pepsi. I don't really have too much else to add besides I think this one's fun, and I'll always have a soft spot for it. After 2 solid and successful X-Men films, X-Men The Last Stand brought the original trilogy to an underwhelming conclusion that, while not without its merits, makes a lot of frustrating choices that I can see why it pissed off so many fans back in 2006. There are some good elements to this that I do wish we got to focus on more. Some of the earlier action sequences, like the opening Danger Room scene, is a highlight. This has some of the best Magneto moments in the series. I really like some of the new characters in this, like Kelsey Grammer as Beast is spot on casting and really brings some gravitas to the character. Ben Foster's Angel has some powerful moments. Elliot Page as Kitty Pryde has some cool powers. The Cure storyline makes for an interesting conflict and has some compelling ideas and questions. Also, Uncanny DH Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen is definitely a choice to start the movie. It's definitely something that I'm so used to seeing in big movies nowadays, but will always still be shocking to me that a film from 2006 tried to do this. Also Juggernaut.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
But this pretty much started some of the worst tendencies of the bad X-Men films that they just never let die. The fact that they didn't know what to do with some of these characters, with this being the most guilty example of how much this trilogy hates Cyclops. In fact, so many characters get the shaft in this movie. Cyclops, Rogue, Mystique, Angel, they get shafted off to the side very quickly, oftentimes for shock value by either depowering them like Mystique or killing them off like Cyclops or Professor X. With its shorter runtime compared to most superhero movies, it's overstuffed in having so many characters and balancing its two plot lines of the Kira storyline and the first of many failed attempts to adapt the Phoenix Saga. It's been botched so many times now that even going back to earlier attempts make me just feel tired and not want to see another adaptation of this story to the big screen, because it's been done badly so many times that I want to see other X-Men stories be adapted to the big screen. The Last Stand isn't the worst X-Men film, but still far from the best and the start of the first dark age of these films. Like the last film, I had fun with Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. It still has what I enjoyed in the first film, with the cast being as great as they were before, with some fun action sequences and the really cool addition of the Silver Surfer. Since this is as of right now the only Fantastic Four film to not be an origin story, this one throws us right into the action to just focus on the character dynamics, which are my favorite parts with this cast. It might juggle around a couple too many plot lines for a film that's only 92 minutes, with the conflict with the Silver Surfer, Reed and Sue's wedding, the government wanting Reed to build his machine to track Silver Surfer, the return of Doctor Doom, and the team switching powers that leads to some amusing laughs. But again, why do these movies love trying to get Jessica Alba naked at least once? Come on, movie, go to horny jail. The bachelor party scene is amusing, particularly Reed's stretchy dance. What can I say? I love comic book movie dance scenes. The Stan Lee cameo makes me laugh every time. The most interesting character has to be the Silver Surfer. With the combination of Doug Jones playing the character physically, some pretty cool effects, and especially Lawrence Fishburne's gravitas as the voice, make for a very interesting character. Honestly, I don't have too much else to add about this one that I haven't already said about the first. I think it's just fun. And this is it. The bottom of the barrel of the X-Men franchise. What else could it be than X-Men Origins Wolverine? What else can I even say about this movie that hasn't already been said many, many times? I guess there's a couple of good elements trying to come out, but they can't quite be able to get there because everything else around it is just so bad. The opening credits with Wolverine and Sabretooth fighting in all the major wars is really cool, and honestly, I wish that was the movie. First 5 minutes of screen time, I like Taylor Kitsch as Gambit. After watching X-Men the Animated Series and X-Men 97, Gambit has become one of my favorite X-Men, so this is at least something, that he's at least there. I still wish that Channing Tatum Gambit movie got made. Really crossing my fingers that he makes a cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine. I forgot that Proximus Caesar played the Blob. No joke. Same actor. There are a couple funny moments, like how this started a mini tradition that a couple of the X-Men films have to have at least one Hugh Jackman butt shot. The moment of the old farm couple coming home to seeing a naked Wolverine running into their barn is hilarious. Everything else about this blows. The story has so many continuity errors from the original X-Men films, like why is a younger Cyclops in this, and shouldn't he recognize Wolverine in the future? Plus, since Wolverine is the main character in the majority of these movies, and his backstory is kind of seen in X-Men 2, I don't think this movie needed to be made. The love story is boring and cliched. Around the middle, the story starts to become repetitive, and there's a clear formula and you can predict exactly what's going to happen. Wolverine tries to hide out in a place, introduce a character or two who die immediately when the government finds him, Cue Michael Bay-like explosions, rinse, and repeat. And this is also one of the shoutiest movies I've ever seen, with so much yelling that it just becomes white noise. And despite this movie coming out in 2009 and coming out 3 years after the last movie, the effects managed to look worse than even the last 3 X-Men films. And then there's what I and many others think is this movie's biggest sin. They fucked up Deadpool. You really have to try to fuck up a character this badly, and they did. The character, who is known as the Merc with the Mouth and is iconic for his wisecracking, fourth wall breaking jokes, gets his mouth sewn shut. No, you don't get to. You don't get to do that. As you can tell, yeah, I really hate this movie. But I'm not gonna act like, I hate this movie so much I wish it was never made. Because we eventually did get some good because of this movie. We would eventually get an accurate and awesome Deadpool thanks to Ryan Reynolds' dedication and his love of making fun of his bad superhero movies, going off of all the mouthless Deadpool jokes and the Green Lantern jokes. And remember, it's always better to acknowledge the bad films and learn from their mistakes instead of pretending they don't exist just because you don't like them. Can we get a good movie now? Oh my god, finally! A good X-Men movie again! I didn't remember too much about X-Men First Class, and for some reason I wasn't initially that big on it when I was younger. But upon rewatch, this movie rocks. It is a strong return to form for the franchise as both a prequel and kind of a soft reboot. X-Men First Class's biggest strength is the characters. This has the best character work in the franchise, as this shows the origins of the X-Men, how Charles and Eric met, and how their relationship progressed into their rivalry. The story's like a hybrid of a superhero ensemble origin story, a political thriller with its Cold War setting, and some touches of classic James Bond films for its 1960s setting. The action and directing feels so alive in this one, more so than any of the other X-Men films, especially since this one comes to us from Matthew Vaughn. He knows how to deliver some fun, exciting, kinetic, and over-the-top action sequences like in the Kingsman films and Kick-Ass. It's honestly a shame that he didn't direct another one of these, because he not only continued to explore the impactful social issues the X-Men are all about, but embraced the comic booky feel with the visuals. This one just has an energy that the other X-Men films don't quite have. He has way more sauce, and also is not a massive piece of shit like Bryan Singer is. The cast of this one is stacked, with everyone delivering their A game. In all 4 of the movies they're in, James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender are perfect as younger Professor X and Magneto. Kevin Bacon is fantastic as the villain Sebastian Shaw, as this was his first standout Marvel role before playing his most iconic role as himself in the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Jennifer Lawrence is also very good as Mystique in at least the first couple of these films. Nicholas Hoult is excellent as Beast and is one of the most consistent MVPs across this era of films next to McAvoy and Fassbender. His conflict with Raven about hiding their mutations is a very interesting and fascinating character arc. I actually kind of forgot that this was Zoe Kravitz's big breakthrough role as Angel, as she would make her way around multiple comic book movie universes in the future, as she voiced Mary Jane in Into the Spider-Verse and played Catwoman in both the Lego Batman movie and The Batman. All she's missing now is joining the MCU, and she'll have a complete comic book movie universe bingo card. Also, the Wolverine cameo is gold and still one of my favorite PG-13 F-bombs.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Charles Xavier.
Go fuck yourself.
With its exciting action scenes, a well-utilized ensemble of interesting characters, and Matthew Vaughn's direction, this is one of my favorite X-Men films. The Wolverine is often the most forgotten film in the X-Men franchise. I really don't see many people talking about this one, as it's the forgotten middle child of both the Wolverine trilogy and where it stands in the release order of the X-Men series as a whole. In the series as a whole, it's sandwiched right between what are often seen as the best X-Men films with First Class and Days of Future Past. And it's the often forgotten middle film of the Wolverine trilogy being not the masterpiece that is Logan, or the disastrous train wreck that is X-Men Origins Wolverine. So all this to say, I think this is the most middle-of-the-road movie of the X-Men franchise. The Wolverine is not a bad movie. The idea of Wolverine fighting the Yakuza sounds like it should be exciting, but I just found the story to be mostly kinda boring. Logan's dreams of Jean got really tired and repetitive because of having to be reminded of Last Stand a lot of times. It can have some cool action like the train fight, though even that starts to veer into boring CGI fight territory in the third act with a fight against a giant robot and a snake lady. And to my surprise, it also has quite a lot of blood for a PG-13 film. I don't know, I think after the rush I got from First Class, I felt excited and ready to get to Days of Future Past and remembered, oh yeah, this movie exists. I can see plenty of the themes that it's going for, but I think they were just done better later with Logan. And admittedly, this does have a great piece of foreshadowing when Yukio tells Logan that she saw him die with his heart in his hand. I can see why some people like it, but this one just didn't really do anything for me. It's not awful, not great, it just exists. X-Men Days of Future Past has always been one of my favorites of the franchise with how much it manages to accomplish. It acts as the culmination of the franchise, that this is the X-Men equivalent of what Infinity War and Endgame were to the MCU, with the highest stakes and story ambition, and also revolving around time travel. The entire film just has this strong sense of finality to it all, like this feels like it should be the last one. Though, it's not. I always love a good time travel story, and Days of Future Past succeeds in combining all the best aspects of the X-Men franchise in its compelling character drama and fun action sequences. For me, this and First Class are tied for my favorite X-Men film. These two I think make the best use of utilizing their ensembles and giving every character time to shine. Both sides in the story in both the future and the past have so much urgency with a lot on the line. In the future, the remaining X-Men are being hunted by the Sentinels with a ticking clock before they arrive at their retreat, and in the past, as Wolverine gets sent back in time to stop Mystique from assassinating Trask, which leads to the dystopian future that they're in. The visual effects are stunning, and the action sequences are a blast. I really like how this film's version of the Sentinels are able to adapt to any mutant that they're fighting, which makes them a strong threat and mirrors Mystique's transformation effect, with how important she is to the story. They really take advantage of every mutant's powers, and all of them are displayed in very creative ways. Even though these characters have been through ups and downs, it's honestly nice to see them all together again for one more adventure. It is awesome to see Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen again as Professor X and Magneto, and plenty of the returning cast members one more time. Having Stewart, McKellen, Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry, and Shawn Ashmore back together is awesome. One supporting character from the older films that I'm really happy to see had a more major role in this was Elliot Page as Kitty Pryde. Though the character's role is significantly changed from the original comic. As in the original comic it's based on, she's the main character who gets sent back in time. Though it makes sense in this movie why it's Wolverine, both for his healing ability and that he's been the main character in these movies. And getting to see Hugh Jackman's Wolverine act alongside the younger cast from First Class is really cool. I already sung my praises and will continue to for James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and Nicholas Hoult, though the dynamic between Logan and McAvoy's Charles is fascinating and a very neat twist on Logan and Charles' dynamic in the first film. In the first film, an older Charles guides Logan into seeing his potential, though in this film, it's a seasoned Logan that ends up teaching a younger and misguided Charles, which also leads into one of the best scenes in the film between McAvoy and Stewart's Charles. Though the one new character that I'll always appreciate this movie for is the introduction of Evan Peters as Quicksilver. He's only in the film for one major sequence, but that sequence has some of the best parts of the whole franchise, with that time in the bottle sequence being unmatched. He has such a naturally fun and charismatic energy that always shines whenever he's on screen. It sucks that this and X-Men 1 and 2 were directed by a massive piece of shit like Bryan Singer, because this movie's really dope, and I think this is the best X-Men team-up film. This would have been an awesome way for the series to go out, but it just wasn't meant to be. Of all the films on this list, this was the only one I didn't want to or need to watch again for this video, because it really is that bad. Fantastic is a superhero film that doesn't want to be a superhero film, and is ashamed to be a superhero film. For the first 40 minutes or so, it's just bad. Not really excruciating, but still not good. But then once they get their powers, that's when the movie goes from bad to worse. The exposition never ends, nothing ever happens, it feels like it just keeps going and going with very little time for the team to develop and work together, especially since Reed disappears for a decent portion of the film. The tone is way off for a Fantastic Four film where this is just dull, boring, and barely any ounces of levity or humor. This film feels like it was made for the edgelords who worship Zack Snyder's DC films because of how dark and mature it is, only to be pretentious and laughably stupid. Similarly to how Snyder sucked the life and charisma out of Superman, this does the same thing with the Fantastic Four. Most of the cast are really talented actors like Miles Teller, Kate Mara, Michael B. Jordan, and Jamie Bell are all great actors who are given very little to do with the horrible script that they've been given. For a superhero film, there is an extreme lack of action, and once it did, I wish it didn't. The last 20 minutes are when this movie just devolves into CGI noise, complete with the trend that all 2010s blockbusters had to have: a sky beam. It is just as obnoxious and exhausting as the third act of Man of Steel, except thankfully nowhere near as long. And any ounces of referencing the source material just feel incredibly forced, and some are extremely off-putting with how they recontextualize them. When the Thing says it's clobbering time during the final battle, it doesn't feel earned and even uncomfortable considering how it's used earlier in the film. And they don't even once say the team's name during the film as it cuts to the credits before the name drop happens. For me, there are two different kinds of bad superhero films. I much prefer the funny bad superhero films like Madam Web or Daredevil or Batman and Robin, that because they're so funny, I would gladly put them on with anyone just to have a good laugh. But that is not what Fantastic is. It is so tone deaf in its awfulness that it's not even funny. It is a boring shit show of a poorly written story, horrible action, dull and flat characters, and no fun or levity that captures the true essence of Marvel's first family. This didn't feel like they made it because they had a new Fantastic Four story they wanted to tell. It was only made just so they could hold on to the rights for a little bit longer before they expired. Whew. Okay. Are we good? No more surprise bad movies want to come out and surprise me? Sounds like we're clear. In that case, time to make some chimmy fucking changas. X, hit it.
X gon' give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you.
I'll always have a special place in my heart for Deadpool, for many reasons. But one of the big ones is that this is among the first R-rated films that I ever watched. It's not the first, but it is one of the first. Before Deadpool, the first two R-rated films that I watched prior were Chef and Good Will Hunting, both amazing films. So to go from those where they were rated R because of language, Deadpool was a massive jump, as it didn't just have language, it had violence, and sex, and nudity, and drugs. It had the whole shebang. And my 14-year-old mind was blown. And 8 years later, I still love everything about Deadpool. It's not just the movie itself that I love, but everything else around it, like the story behind it, its equally hilarious marketing, and its cultural impact. I can't think of any other actor who's as passionate for their character as much as Ryan Reynolds is for Deadpool. Reynolds really fought to get this film made for years, and then after some test footage got leaked and the response was extremely enthusiastic, Fox gave the film a green light, and it was worth it. When looking at it from a story standpoint, Deadpool isn't doing anything too groundbreaking with its superhero origin story, revenge plot, and love story. But knowing the nature of the character, of course he's gonna make fun of that among so many other things. Deadpool knows what it is, and it does so well that it's spectacular and still one of the best films in the X-Men franchise. It's a perfect adaptation of the character to the big screen. It's so gleefully raunchy in all the best ways, and it wears that R rating like a badge of honor, and the only way that you can make a Deadpool movie. The violence is over the top and bloody, the swearing is all over the dialogue, and so many gleeful sex jokes and some nudity. This just has everything I want from an extremely rewatchable action comedy. Right from the start with its mocking opening credits, you know that this is a different kind of superhero movie. There's so much I love about this movie, but at the center of it is Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. There is nobody else that can play Deadpool better than he does. He has so much natural charisma and wit with all of his fourth wall breaking. But Reynolds isn't just a joke machine who refuses to shut up, as through his backstory, we see who Wade Wilson is and become attached to him as a character. The humor is the movie's greatest strength, as even after several watches, I still laugh at all these jokes just as much as I did back in 2016. Deadpool breaks the fourth wall, makes a barrage of pop culture references, and makes fun of whatever he wants. Ryan Reynolds clearly loves making fun of the bad superhero movies he's been in, as you can always expect to see at least one mouthless Deadpool and Green Lantern joke in these. Always love when a movie star has some self-awareness. There are plenty of jabs at the superhero formula, and especially jokes at the X-Men's expense, like how they joke about not being able to afford another X-Man, with how the brief moments at the school are empty, especially with Deadpool's rivalry with Colossus and his accompanying trainee, Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Which I agree with Deadpool, that is the coolest name ever. And it's not just Reynolds that delivers, because the cast in this is fantastic and delivers some fun and memorable characters. Morena Baccarin is great as Wade's love interest Vanessa. Ajax isn't the most originally written villain, but Ed Skrein delivers in making a villain you love to hate, and I've never once called him Ajax, only Francis. Stefan Kapicic is really funny as Colossus and a great foil to Wade because he's the goody two-shoes to Wade's uncontrollable rebel. Brianna Hildebrand is also awesome as Negasonic Teenage Warhead. I don't view TJ Miller as highly as I did in the mid-2010s when he was a popular comic relief actor after his assault allegations and him going cuckoo with his fake bomb threat arrest, but Weasel's jokes still make me laugh. Also, Negasonic beating the crap out of Gina Carano is really satisfying. I never mentioned her once on Twitter, but I have the badge of honor to say that I got blocked by Gina Carano. Because once you drink the right-wing Kool-Aid, your brain strays so far from reality that you might as well be in another universe. The action sequences are awesome, as director Tim Miller's skills with supervising visual effects are on full display here with some great stunt work. It's honestly impressive looking back that this was done for pretty cheap for a superhero movie, as this was made on a budget of $58 million. And they made the most of what they had in both the production and the marketing with a big focus on the internet. And it paid off so well because this ended up becoming a massive hit that I'm sure even Fox wasn't expecting this to make $783 million worldwide. And its $363 million gross domestically makes it the highest grossing film in the X-Men franchise at the domestic box office. Just to put that into perspective at the time, Deadpool made more money domestically than Captain America, Thor, The Amazing Spider-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Batman v Superman, and every single X-Men movie. That is impressive. Deadpool will always be one of my favorite superhero movies of all time, and one of the X-Men series' crowning achievements. It's thanks to this movie why Deadpool is one of my favorite Marvel characters next to Rocket Raccoon and Captain America. It's raunchy, it's violent, it's so fucking profane, and it's always a blast. And that is the fucking magic of Deadpool. After the two best films in the series, X-Men Apocalypse is unfortunately another third film letdown that is a mixed bag with some things that work and others that repeat the same tiresome mistakes as all the previous bad X-Men films. I think Gene said it best.
Well, at least we can all agree the third one's always the worst.
Apocalypse has some potential ideas that could work, but this movie is just too overstuffed. But hey, at least it's not boring. There are so many characters it introduces, and none of them don't get the development that they deserve. And it feels in a way like Bryan Singer wanting to go full force on putting together his original X-Men team again and undoing a lot of what Matthew Vaughn started in First Class by introducing younger versions of characters like Jean, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, and Storm. Also, Angel and Psylocke are there. They barely have any lines, they don't really matter too much, they're just kinda there. This should have been a smaller scale story after the last film tied up all the loose ends with the original series, to now give room for this younger timeline to transition into a full reboot to establish this X-Men team before leading into another big epic film. This movie just feels desperate, as they recycle plot beats and action sequences that were done way better in previous X-Men films. The detour in Stryker's base, already done way better in X-Men 2. Magneto's arc with always flipping between good guy and bad guy, it just repeats itself every film. Jean gets another tiresome Phoenix setup, which later gets retconned in the next movie. Some of the fan service feels forced, like having another forced Wolverine cameo just to pop in for a minute to just kill some guys. Even my favorite scene in the movie, which is of course the Quicksilver scene, relies so much on recapturing the same magic as the Time in the Bottle scene from Days of Future Past. Don't get me wrong, I love this Quicksilver scene just as much as the one in Days of Future Past. It is just as much of a blast, where the movie has the highest energy and the humor is at its peak, all set to the banger Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. I wasn't really thinking it was as bad as I remembered, but then I remember that by the time we reach the third act, that's when I completely check out. The third act is so uninspired, bland, and just CGI noise flying everywhere. And one of the movie's biggest detriments is that Apocalypse is just such a boring villain. He just says the most boring bad guy dialogue that you can imagine, and the prosthetics do look pretty ridiculous. And I always have to remind myself that he is played by Oscar Isaac, and it's a shame that this movie does waste his talents. Thankfully, the MCU and the Spider-Verse would give Oscar Isaac redemption for some great performances in other Marvel Universe, like as Moon Knight and Spider-Man 2099. Though like the previous films, the performances really do help in carrying this movie to make it at least watchable. McAvoy, Fassbender, and Holt are as top-notch as ever. It's nice to see Rose Byrne again. You can kind of see Jennifer Lawrence starting to check out, but it's not as obvious as it is in the next movie. Evan Peters is just as awesome as ever as Quicksilver, and sadly he gets an important character development that never gets resolved. It's even more of a shame that the characters it introduces are underutilized, because I do like them in their roles. Sophie Turner is solid as Jean, I like Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, and I think it's funny that the two roles I know him for most have a good amount of time where his eyes are covered with these last two X-Men films and Ready Player One. Alexandra Shipp is okay as Storm. Cody Smith-McPhee is great as Nightcrawler, as he gets some pretty good jokes and is a highlight in the action just as much as Alan Cumming was in X-Men 2. And why did this movie just completely forget about Jubilee? She was part of that younger friend group that got established, but then they just completely ditch her in the aftermath of the Quicksilver scene for the rest of the movie. X-Men Apocalypse isn't quite one of the worst, but it is definitely one of the most frustrating, because there are things about it that do work and are trying to get out, but there's so much that really doesn't, as this marks the beginning of the end of the X-Men series. Much like Deadpool, Logan will always have a special place in my heart as the end of an era for a superhero icon. I can still remember my dad being very excited for this since its release day was on his birthday, March 3rd, 2017. So that was what my brother and I's gift to him was, that we would go see Logan. Logan also holds a significant milestone for me, that this was the first R-rated film that I saw in theaters, and what a film to hold that title. To this day, I still can't think of any other comic book film that has come close to the raw brutality of Logan. It doesn't feel like a superhero movie, which is one of the reasons why I sometimes say superhero movie and other times say comic book movie. It stands so well above a good amount of the X-Men films that it isn't even close that this is the best one. With how somber it isn't one of those films that I rewatch super frequently, but anytime I do put it on every couple of years, it reminds me of how amazing it is. It's somber, but it's not without small glimmers of hope. It's dark and moody, but never to a point that it tries so hard to be edgy that it's comical. Both Logan and Deadpool were two of Fox's biggest swings, and they succeeded for many reasons, though it's not just because of their R ratings, and they both make the most of their R ratings for different reasons because they're totally different films. They're both hard Rs for similar reasons, but the impact is completely different. Deadpool is a raunchy character, so when he's cursing, making sex jokes, and shooting swarms of goons with blood everywhere, it's done so gleefully and comically that it feels like a live-action cartoon. Logan, on the other hand, makes the most of its R by letting Wolverine curse way more and especially slicing people in action. With how much more grounded Logan is in its story and tone, the violence hits harder and has a more visceral impact. All of that is great, but it's not why Logan is the masterpiece it is. It's because of its story, characters, performances, and direction. Logan is the perfect ending that ends Logan and Charles Xavier's stories on an emotional conclusion. For this film, James Mangold took cues from westerns for his direction with this one, and it works to great effect. It's way more character-driven and reflective than what you'd expect from a superhero film. It's quite impressive that this was the first live-action superhero film to get recognized in a writing category, as this got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Mangold, Scott Frank, and Michael Green crafted a stellar script that is really well put together and keeps you invested from start to finish, and is a great display for all three of their works in each of their stacked resumes. The visuals are absolutely incredible and match its dark tone. I also want to mention that for this rewatch, I revisited the black and white version, Logan Noir, that was included on the movie's Blu-ray. It looks just as incredible in black and white, with the nighttime scenes looking particularly amazing in black and white. I already loved Logan as is in color, but for me, the black and white version really brought out a bit more of why I love Logan so much. When you remove the color and all the red blood and gore that's getting slashed everywhere, it's still just as visceral, but it also brings out the raw emotion a bit more. It doesn't change the way you see the movie, it just depends on which version you prefer. As besides the color change, the only visual change to the movie is the 20th Century Fox logo at the beginning, with the normal current logo in the theatrical version and the 1950s logo in the noir version to give it that old-fashioned feel. And with such a character-driven story, the actors have to do a lot of the heavy lifting in telling the story, and this has some of the best performances in the genre from its three leads. Hugh Jackman gives his best performance as Logan. He's been consistently great in his entire run as Wolverine, but he really goes all out here with how bitter and jaded he is towards the end of his life. Jackman is awesome, but the two standout performances that really strengthen the movie's emotional core are Patrick Stewart and Daphne Keane. This is also Patrick Stewart's best performance as Charles Xavier, and it's just as strong of a send-off for him as it is for Logan. There's just as much tragedy for Charles in the state that he's in as much as it is for Logan, since he's suffering dementia and destructive seizures, but he still has some of that Professor X spark in him that tries to come through in such a sad state. And then there is Daphne Keane as Laura. She is a star and makes a hell of a debut with this. She steals the movie, kicks so much ass in action, and for most of the movie, she conveys so much emotion without saying a word. I really want to see her in more stuff. Logan is the best X-Men film, and it isn't even close. It's mature, reflective, and intense, told with stellar directing and incredible performances to make for an emotionally powerful and devastating ending for Wolverine. After the massive success of the first Deadpool, of course it wasn't a surprise that they would immediately go forward with a sequel, and as promised from the Ferris Bueller reference post-credits scene, they have Cable. This was one of the many films I can remember being super hyped for in 2018, which I think was the best superhero movie year ever. Everything about Deadpool 2 is bigger than the first, and you can tell. The story, the cast, the action sequences, the effects, the jokes, everything is much bigger in this one. I still kind of prefer 1 over this because it just has a bit more oomph for how fresh it was at the time, and overall the story is a bit tighter and more focused. But this is absolutely not to discredit 2 because I also love Deadpool 2 in its own right, and some aspects I think are better than in the first one. As Deadpool put it best, the first one is a love story, and this one is a family film. Family is a major part of this movie. They talk about it so much that I kind of expect Dom Toretto to just suddenly pop in just because. In this one, Wade learns the value of working with others and the importance of having friends fighting together alongside you. And the story is also a Terminator-like time travel story, where Wade has to protect a young mutant from getting killed by Cable, who's trying to stop his family from getting murdered by that young mutant in the future. The humor still has me in hysterics every time, with plenty of running jokes that still make me laugh. I cannot hear Do You Want to Build a Snowman anymore without thinking of Papa Can You Hear Me and how similar they sound. Though, I still haven't seen Yentl. Papa, can you hear me? Or, do you want to build a snowman? Deadpool 2 also has one of my favorite post-credits scenes of all time. The action sequences are awesome in both films, though I have to give Deadpool 2 the upper edge in terms of action, since it was directed by, in the opening credits words, one of the guys who killed the dog in John Wick, David Leitch. Leitch has become one of my favorite action directors in recent years thanks to some really fun films that he's done like this, Bullet Train, and The Fall Guy. The action is as bloody and violent as ever, with even more really creative stunts and effects on display thanks to the movie's higher budget. Everything involving Domino are some of my favorite parts of the movie because luck really is the best superpower. The opening montage of Deadpool's world tour of fighting organized crime is a strong opening. The fight on the Conway has so many moving pieces and they are all perfectly executed, and the climax of the orphanage is so satisfying watching them kill all those child abusers. Especially since those are the exact people who are going on and on about protecting kids when they're the people we should be protecting kids from. All the characters, returning or new for this film, are all awesome and bring something to the movie. Josh Brolin in his second superhero villain role that summer is a great Cable and a great foil to Deadpool. Julian Dennison is excellent as Russell, and Reynolds insisted on casting him after seeing him in Taika Waititi's amazing film Hunt for the Wilderpeople. And Ryan was right because a bunch of his strengths in that film are also on display in this. Zazie Beetz is a badass as Domino. In fact, most of my favorite characters she's played are badasses like Domino or Diane Foxington. The X-Force, for the brief time that they're in it, do supply some really funny cameos and supply one of my favorite superhero movie tropes, introducing a team of characters just to brutally kill them off a few minutes later. It never fails to make me laugh. Also, Peter is the best. Protect Sugar Bear at all costs. In both films, Deadpool and Colossus's banter always gets the biggest laughs from me, and in this one, we do see Colossus eventually learn from Wade that sometimes you have to fight dirty. I always love Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and anytime her and Yukio are on screen, just make me happy because they're a cute couple. Yukio is just the embodiment of positivity, and I can see why Deadpool really likes her. One of the pop culture references that always makes me laugh is when Wade refers to Yukio as Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony. And he's not wrong. She's not an over-the-top party animal, but she just radiates happiness. Also, Deadpool and Pinkie Pie would totally be best friends because they're both big fourth wall breakers. And Reynolds doesn't just play Deadpool again, he also plays the Juggernaut. Sadly, he doesn't say the line, but his presence is still really funny just because of his theme. And it's not just that little piece of score, as the soundtrack in general is pretty great, with some really great music choices, and also because of the fact that we got an original song by Celine Dion that plays during the opening credits with Ashes. With even better action sequences, a more poignant story, and awesome characters, Deadpool 2 is a top-notch sequel that lives up to its predecessor. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually didn't hate Dark Phoenix as much as I did when it came out. All of the bad press, reviews, and expectations with this being the last X-Men film at the time really got to my head back in 2019. I focused way too much on the things about it that really grinds my gears and copied why it made so many other people so angry. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this marathon in the first place, to see if my opinions on these films will change in the years it's been since I've last seen them. And this was one of those cases where my opinion on it took a big change. I still wouldn't call Dark Phoenix good, but I feel I didn't give enough credit to the movie's strengths on its own and removed it from the discourse when it first released. The number of Phoenix Saga botch-ups in this series has made me numb to it, and it's pretty much expected with adaptation comes changes. For the first 15 minutes, I was like, hey, this is actually pretty good. With Jean's backstory, and especially with the opening action scene with the astronaut rescue mission. It made good use of the X-Men working together as a team, which was awesome to see. But after that, I felt something a bit different. I wasn't really hating it, and I didn't really quite think it had fallen off a cliff yet. The rest of the action scenes are for the most part pretty solid, with the train climax being a particular highlight, and you can never go wrong with the great Hans Zimmer score. After X-Men Apocalypse, I kind of appreciate that this one went for a smaller scale character-driven story. I think a film like this is one we should have gotten after Days of Future Past instead of Apocalypse. I don't think of the Phoenix Saga as a small-scale story at all, but the character conflicts between the X-Men actually kind of worked for me this time. I do feel sorry for Simon Kinberg because he's a talented producer and can be a solid writer sometimes, but he just got dealt a bad hand at the wrong time. Even with his missteps like The Last Stand or Apocalypse, he still wrote Days of Future Past and produced that film, the Deadpool films, and Logan. With how long he's been involved with this franchise, I think he has some understanding and respect for these characters. For the most part, the performances are very solid and consistent with the previous films with this cast. McAvoy, Fassbender, and Holt still give their all. The kitchen scene with Hank and Charles is some of McAvoy and Holt's best acting in the series. And with a story as big as the Phoenix Saga, they needed more time to develop it for you to be attached to these characters, especially with Jean Grey herself. This was only the second film with Sophie Turner's version of the character, and that's why I've kept saying that there should have been another smaller scale film for us to be more attached to this younger cast, so when something major like this happens, we actually care. When I first saw the movie, I was so pissed about them fridging Quicksilver really quickly. I know he doesn't die, but he practically disappears for the rest of the movie. Honestly, I'm still more ticked off by this than with his WandaVision twist, which I came around to laughing off, and I gotta respect that kind of elaborate trolling just for a boner joke.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner.
But the one thing that still hasn't changed for me is that the alien side of the story is still as dull and bad as I remembered. But I will admit that it is shocking and really ballsy for them to introduce aliens in these movies in the last film. I still stand by that Vuk is one of the worst villains that I've ever seen in a superhero movie. She has barely any motivation, no personality whatsoever, with Jessica Chastain's painfully dull and bored performance. No joke, I think Ezekiel Sims in Madam Web is a better villain than Vuk. At least his obvious ADR is something to laugh at. And I will always remember that he was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died. And back then, it was pretty much because of this movie why I had a major distaste for Jennifer Lawrence for a while. Especially after seeing her talk about how much she hated playing Mystique and being in makeup for hours, which makes me ask, then why did you take the role in the first place? Plus, going into this, you can see in her performance that she's checked out and wanted to get to her death scene, which was also spoiled in the trailer. But after rewatching First Class and Days of Future Past, I softened on my stance on Lawrence after seeing some good performances from her in these movies, and she isn't the worst actress in the movie. So yeah, I kinda turned around on this movie. A bit. I wouldn't say it's good, but there's enough potential there for me to at least put it above some of the other mixed bags of the franchise. Not a strong way for the series to go out, but there's been worse. And this is it. The last Marvel film under the Fox name, The New Mutants. The New Mutants is the film I'll always remember as the one that just never came out for the longest time because of the ridiculous amount of delays it went through. It just kind of became expected that The New Mutants would get delayed again. I can still remember when the teaser trailer came out at the end of 2017, back when it was supposed to come out in April 2018. At least before it got delayed to February 2019 to avoid Deadpool 2. Then delayed to August of that year to avoid Dark Phoenix. Then delayed again to April 2020 after Disney acquired Fox. And then delayed yet again when it got taken off the schedule when COVID shut everything down. And after all of those delays, I can kind of see why Disney didn't want to deal with it anymore and just dumped it out in August when barely any theaters were open and the pandemic was still at its height. It pretty much became a running joke about how this movie would just never come out and would always keep getting delayed. I can still remember Dan Murrell and Screen Junkies had a running clock of the countdown to New Mutants. Like a bunch of the films in the franchise, The New Mutants has plenty of potential to make for a great film, but it just doesn't quite reach it. I'll definitely give Fox credit that for the last couple of years, they weren't afraid of trying some new things and giving their films a wide variety of different flavors and genres. Like, Deadpool is a raunchy comedy, Logan is a gritty drama, and in the case of The New Mutants, this is a hybrid of a psychological horror and YA coming-of-age film. There's some interesting ideas and characters that could make for a unique kind of superhero film with a small cast and scale. This is one of those cases that I just wish it was longer so we could flesh out its characters and ideas more, because this movie is only 94 minutes long, though its pacing is all over the place. I appreciate having some more shorter blockbusters, but this is one of those cases that it would have benefited from a longer runtime. Though sadly, not much could have been done as the delays were a massive curse to the film, as planned reshoots to make the film scarier and closer to director Josh Boone's original vision ultimately never happened. In execution, it's ultimately kind of messy in the different genres that this movie is trying to be. It's trying to be a YA coming-of-age film, a psychological horror film, and then it turns into a typical superhero film in the third act with a big battle with a CGI demon bear. It tries to be a horror film, but I don't really think it's that scary. The marketing really played up the scariness of it, as the attempts at scares don't really have much bite. And it's not because it's PG-13. Though I'll at least give it credit for trying something different, even if the final product doesn't quite come together. The YA angle does make sense considering Josh Boone's previous film before this was The Fault in Our Stars, which I think has one of the stronger aspects of the film with the relationship between Danny and Rain, also helped by good performances by Blue Hunt and Macy Williams. Williams is especially great, and I think she gives the picture some heart. I really like Anya Taylor-Joy, but I don't think this is one of her strongest performances, and her character isn't really that likable, especially with her initial blatant racism towards Danny. Though I will admit her powers that are on full display in the third act are pretty cool. Of all the X-Men films, this is the one that I feel the most sorry for. Not because it's bad, but because I can see the potential it had and the things that work are there. But it was a victim of bad timing that was ultimately out of the movie's control. Though, I still miss the running joke of this always getting delayed. And that is all of them. What a roller coaster that was. So after all that, it's now time for my final ranking of all these movies. So, going from worst to best, they are... Number 18, Fantastic. Number 17, Elektra. Number 16, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Number 15, Daredevil. Number 14, X-Men The Last Stand. Number 13, The Wolverine. Number 12, X-Men Apocalypse. Number 11, Dark Phoenix. Number 10, The New Mutants. Number 9, Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer. Number 8, Fantastic Four. Number 7, X-Men. Number 6, X2. Number 5, Deadpool 2. Number 4, X-Men First Class. Number 3, X-Men Days of Future Past. Number 2, Deadpool. And number 1, Logan. Well, that was a lot. Pretty fun, for the most part, but I'm tired. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.